Well, hello there. This is the Leaders World brought to you by Leaders World Institute. Yes, it's your space where we speak with leaders about leadership. Yes, and our aim is one leader at a time. We are hoping you're that leader today with us, and we are hoping that your life is going to um, uh, receive a push in the right direction. Your leadership, your personal development will receive the right push in the right direction. Your family, your career, and guess what? Today is special. Why is it special? It's special because we have Reverend Dr. Shu Daniel with us. Who is he? He's a medical specialist, a university president and professor. He's an educator. He's an ordained minister. He's a He's an author, and he has a passion for transformation of African leadership. And that is why we are here to speak with you on new paradigms in African leadership. New paradigms in African leadership. I could give you more about what Dr. Shu has accomplished, but I'll just give you just a little bit. Listen, we'll take the whole 30 minutes if we stayed here reading all of it. All right. So he's born in Cameroon, but trained in the continent as well, and in France and in the USA. He has been a radiologist and also a leadership trainer for the past 3 decades. He holds certificates like masters in organizational leadership, a PhD in Christian leadership. He has taught thousands of Christian professionals across the continent of Africa and the globe in leadership. His areas of expertise have included leadership, management, strategic planning, paradigm shift, marriage, counseling, integrity, and good governance. Since 2011, he has pioneered the Lead Complex with Lead Higher Institute and a university plant in Yaoundé, Cameroon. He is married for 37 years with lovely children. Ladies and gentlemen, without much ado, join me. Welcome to the studio, Dr. Shu Daniel.
Hello, hello, Madame Suzanne. It's a pleasure coming on again on Leaders World.
Yes,
and
sir.
I'm
Yes,
grateful
sir.
that God is using you and your husband mightily to influence leaders across the world.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. Listen, where we are today, I want you to know, our listeners, where we are today in leadership. It's been because of the supervision of Dr. Shu Daniel. My very first trainings, my very first steps have been because of his supervision. And where I am today, my story cannot be told without his great impact in my life. So he is a
Thank you.
mentor to thousands of leaders in the world, and we are privileged to have you today, sir. We are going
Thank
to
you.
be talking on new paradigms in African leadership, learning from the past to build the future. It was such an honor just sitting there and drinking from these rich wells that you have put in a book. But I was wondering, wow, shouldn't
Thank
the
you.
whole world actually read this book? Sir, why did you write this book though?
New paradigms in African leadership, learning from the past to build the future. Honestly, speaking, Madam Echu, in those early years when we started leadership in the early the third millennium, that's about 2002 to 2020, I was very, very zealous. And I was saying, I'm going to change African leadership. I'm going to bring a change. And I went from nation to nation, teaching leaders and expecting the change to come overnight. And then I realized that shifting a paradigm takes time, takes a minimum of 10 years at times in some places. So I said, since I cannot get everything go through at once, I need to put it in a book such that those who come after me will be able to understand where we started, what we left undone, and so that they can continue to do it.
Wow. Where we started, what we left undone, and what they can continue to do. Learning from the past to build the future.
Yeah.
Why?
Yes. The past of leadership in Africa has been both positive and negative. When you look at the leadership evolution in Africa, we have moved from the pre-colonial period through the colonial period, and now we are at the level of the post-colonial period, which we call independence. Well, fake independence or pseudo-independence. And now we are in a fourth phase of leadership in Africa, which is the third millennial phase of leadership. And you realize that we have learned from the pre-colonial period, which was basically traditional leadership. We've learned from the colonial period, where it was dictatorship leadership from the colonial masters. And we've also learned from the post-colonial period, which apparently has not succeeded, because it would seem as if our leaders learned the style of leadership from the colonial masters, and they have gone on with dictatorial leadership. And so we are saying now, in the third millennium, things have to change. We're talking of bringing in a new brand of leadership, which we thought was supposed to have been brought in the post-colonial period. But unfortunately, the post-colonial period failed. And so we're thinking that the third millennium should bring in that new brand of leaders.
So how does this dictatorial leadership look like in practice? What is the experience of those who are under that kind of leadership, just so we actually know what we are looking for as far as what we need to change?
Yes. African leadership has been plagued by two forces. The first force is traditional leadership. Traditional leadership has its positive and its negatives. If you want to talk of the positive aspects of traditional leadership, you can talk about the respect, the hierarchical manner of handling things, some development that has taken place in the local environments, and the thought of bringing legacy, leaving a legacy. All this has been in the traditional leadership. Now, the colonial masters came in, and what they did was they virtually destroyed, or they virtually eliminated traditional leadership because of the negatives of traditional leadership, which include, mysticism, which include one man kind of authoritative rule also. And so, because they came in with a modern or a new style of leadership from Europe, and we realized that the two came in conflict. And so when our leaders took over after independence, they neither used the traditional leadership style, nor did they use the modern leadership style, or the colonial leadership style. And they tried to join the two. And instead of gaining the positive, the values of the traditional and the values of the colonial masters, they seem to have fallen into the vices of the colonial leadership, which is mysticism, which is dictatorship, and and then the colonial masters leadership too, which also said the white man is better, and the black man just has to receive from them and do what they tell them. And so they seem to have fallen the vices of both leadership, and that's why the leadership in Africa has not really evolved as we expected it to be.
Wow.
But for instance, obviously, there have been a few leaders who have been standing out. Of course, everybody around the world will talk of Nelson Mandela. Everybody will also talk of Muammar Gaddafi, who are very prominent African leaders who have really left outstanding results. There are other leaders like 𝗡𝗄 𝗣𝗿𝗱𝗶𝗴𝗺𝗀 of Benin, who also left some very good legacy in Benin. But when you talk of others, Thomas Sankara, also Padre Lumumba, those are leaders that left good legacies. But when you talk about, everybody talks about the Ghanaian, the former Ghanaian Kwame Nkrumah. But in reality, Kwame Nkrumah left ideologies. He really didn't leave anything as prominent as a positive legacy apart from ideologies. The ideologies of Pan-Africanism, which have not really worked because there's a lot of egoism in African leadership and everybody wants to lead. So you find the segmentation that was done by the colonial masters is kept on, and it has continued to divide Africa and prevent Africa from a positive leadership mentality.
Wow, new paradigms in African leadership, new paradigms in African leadership with Dr. Shudania right here. Doctor, I'm listening to you and I am thinking about, how you've told us about the traditional and the colonial ways of leading, the traditional and the colonial, and how our leaders in Africa seem to have taken a lot of the vices from both, and
Yes.
that is why African leadership is suffering in Africa, in African countries. So if you were to give us in a nutshell the virtues of the traditional leadership and the colonial leadership, because you did not say they are all wrong. You said they all have their values, their virtues, and they also have vices. So if you were to give us the virtues that we should be looking for from both the colonial and the traditional leadership, so we can bring Africa into a new era of better leadership where the citizens are enjoying their countries and they are proud to be citizens of those countries and they are not struggling to run away to other countries. You know what I'm saying, right? So what should we be looking for as far as those values and virtues if we are looking at the traditional and the colonial ways of leadership that you have mentioned?
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Echu. First of all, let us look at some great values of our traditional leadership.
Okay.
There is a very good team spirit when it comes to traditional leadership. When you take, for instance, the villages that have chieftaincies, the chiefs do not rule alone. Every chief has a team that backs him. And we should call them the traditional councils. And these traditional councils are those that take decisions with the chief. And so when the chief stands up to give decisions or conclusions about what is happening in the village, it is not just his ideas. They are the ideas that come from a team that has met and has taken those decisions. Then in Africa, you have what you call respect. There's so much respect of hierarchy. We respect the elderly. In fact, it's said in Africa that gray hair is wisdom. And in leadership, you say you need to stand on the shoulders of the wise and the older people to be able to see what they can see while sitting down. So African leadership respects this a lot. And so there is this respect of hierarchy. And in African leadership, the aspect of mentorship has been very, very good. Every king prefer, it's a biblical principle, which I think our traditional leaders have handled it so well. Jesus Christ trained 3 leaders, who has mentored 3 leaders who are going to take over from him. It was Peter, James, and John. And in the final analysis, Peter was his successor. But he didn't train just one person. And in the village too, every village chief mentors a series of children whom he would hand over the leadership to one of them. And the chiefs and their traditional councils always work towards development. They are always thinking, how do we develop the village? How do we develop the environment? And they also build a lot of legacy. In fact, if you go to my village and you see the palace that was built in the 18th century, it is still standing up today as a modern structure, and it has become a legacy in our tradition. So those are among some of the very good values that our African leadership has maintained. Now, when you get to the colonial leadership was involved with visionary leadership. You know, they have a vision. They look 20 years ahead of time, 30 years ahead of time, and they say, where will we be in the next 20 years? So they are able to build vision and visionary leadership, set goals and objectives, and then they build a winning team. What do I mean by a winning team? Of course, you know what a team is. They are forward players, they are back keepers, and their goals, and so they build a team of qualified, performing people who will be able to carry out the vision and realize the vision. And then they are also thinking of building a legacy and also building succession. So these are, you see, values from both sides, which normally the African leaders would have benefited from. But unfortunately, many of our leaders have not benefited from this. You know, my study for my PhD in Christian leadership was on the plight of African leadership. And we realized that the first plight was egoicism. There is egoicism in our leadership. And that's why you find a president of a small nation as one of 1.5 million will want to remain a leader instead of joining with another nation of 5 million or 6 million. And that's the reason why, you know, Kwame Nkrumah's ideology of Pan-Africanism has never really worked, because every person is egoistic. He wants to be a leader, and he wants to have people under him. And then apart from that, you have this issue of mysticism. Africa is, first of all, a very mystical country, because the continent, because we have a lot of traditional sects, traditional occultic practices, altars and sacrifices. And in addition to that, as if that were not enough, you find a lot of African leaders who are going to the West, who are going to the East Asia, and who are going to Latin America to get their own kinds of occultism to add on top. And so you find a lot of our political leadership that is plagued by mysticism, both and Occidental. And that's why we're not developing. I'll just give you an example, Suzanne. Look at South Korea. When you compare South Korea and North Korea, there's a world of a difference. They are the same country, but for the fact that they have two different political arenas. The political arena of South Korea has embraced God, godliness. And because they have embraced God, God has helped the leadership to develop. And today, South Korea is one of the 7 great powers in the world. Wow. But North Korea has rejected God. North Korea has continued with communism. And you see where they are, a retarded nation. I think if our African leadership could embrace on one side model leadership, mentorship, and on this other side, godliness, I think we will be better off than where we are today.
Thank you so much. There's so many questions that are popping in my brain right now, but let me just settle on this one. In your book, you talked about the 5 pillars of leadership. You talked about the 5 pillars of leadership, and they are personality, performance, people, power, and product.
Yes.
Personality, performance, people, power, and product. Can you just throw more light into what those are and why do we need them? And is there anything beyond that, or the 5 pillars are the 5 pillars?
Obviously, that's my way of seeing leadership. There may be obviously more pillars, but I think to me these 5 pillars are priority, because you know, when you talk of personality, we're talking about a leader being a model in integrity, a model in management, a model in character. But unfortunately, we find a lot of our leaders who steal and bank stolen wealth in foreign banks, and some of them die without being able to use it. And the Western nations, which are already developed, they again profit from our meager resources because they go and bank these monies abroad. They die without using them. And I don't want to quote examples, but these are things that are happening. And so the country continues to, to go down in poverty, in misery, in underdevelopment. Meanwhile, the developed countries are profiting from our riches. So we need leaders that are models, that can say, Paul says, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. And of course, when you look at some of the Western world leaders, some of them have lost elections because they were impeached for immorality. Tell me, which African president has ever been impeached for immorality or for corruption? Some of them, they steal the wealth of the nation. Which of them has really been impeached? And that's one of the problems, Madam Echoo, you see, because they are afraid that when they leave power, they will be impeached, like the former president of Egypt, and some of them will die in prison. They therefore modify constitutions regularly in order to die in power. So it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate.
So sad.
And when you keep on, the last time I studied about 3 years ago, there were about 11 African countries that had modified their constitutions for their presidents to stay in power. Can you imagine that? So personality is the first. We need leaders that are models. Secondly, we need performance. Yes. Performance talks of competence, talks of principles that are respected. The Constitution is the first principle that is respected. The second respect is that when you get somebody in power, you have to be able to make him accountable. You have to be able to give him objectives of what to realize. If a minister comes on and doesn't know what is expected of him, he will just sit on the seat, and at the end, he has swindled the monies and go away. But if leaders know that I will be evaluated at the end of my mandate before I can be sworn in again, they will work. But it doesn't happen. There's no accountability. There's no, there are no goals and objectives. And so that's performance. When it comes to power now, there's a lot of power abuse. Power is, the purpose of power is to make positive things happen. That's what leadership is about. Make positive things happen. Change, create history, positive history for which you will remember. Now, as I go across Africa, I ask people, who are the presidents you can remember in your nation? The president they remember out of 5 or 6 are those that created history. Like Patrick Lumumba, who reigned for less than 1 year, but he created history. Thomas Sankara, who reigned for less than just a couple of years, he created history. And you continue across the line. People that have created history, Matthew Keriku, who have created history, but all the others, they are just managers. They come in, they stay in power, they sweep. So power is meant to build the nations, to bring development. Now, the people talks of the economic change. There must be positive economic improvement under the leadership of somebody. But you realize that our economy has remained bad because of the neo-colonialistic tendencies and impeachment in our leadership. And lastly, product. Every leader has a product, positive or negative. Many African leaders have no product. I even go as far as saying that bin Laden has a product, even though his product is negative, but he has made history. Now, you, a leader in your position of leadership, what is your product? What will you be remembered for? Because a product gives you identity and becomes your legacy. Now, the question is, what is your product as a leader? For what will you be remembered? And I think that is the most important thing. So those are the 5 pillars that I talk about. And I think that African leaders, if they were to get into putting into place these 5 pillars, exercising them, I think we will be better off, 100 times better off than where we are today.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Which one are you going on with, beloved listeners and viewers?
Yeah.
Just put in the chat, okay? Let us know which of these principles you're going to digest more and put more into practice, because Dr. Shu is just throwing gems all over the place. Now, which one are you picking? Which one are you picking? Put it in the chat. Let's know you're there. All right. Where do you see Africa in the next 20 years? Where do you see African leadership in the next 20 years?
Very good question. Very good question. I wish, I think it's in this book or in another book, I talked about my dream for Africa in the next couple of years. And I wish that my dream were to become true. I talked of you can make it, you will make it. And I'm talking of where leadership should be in the next 20 years. But let me just put it in a positive note. The first thing is that it depends. It depends on the attitude, the performance of the leaders that are in place now. Everything depends on them. But I want to say that I personally think that Africa has gone through the darkest hour and it can only improve from now. Let me give you my reasons. We are supposed to have been 50 to 60 years independent, but in reality, we are not. We have been neo-colonized by especially those of us who are from the French-speaking countries, because we know the 14 African French-speaking countries in Africa. We know exactly the impact of neo-colonialism in these countries. But let me say this. The first thing is our youths, who are our future leaders, they have realized that the colonial masters are no longer doing us any good. And there are youth riots everywhere in Africa against the colonial masters. And I think the colonial masters should learn from what is happening in Africa. It's time for them to pack out and leave and allow African leadership to Africans. That's the very first thing. If this happens, I think we're on a positive note. The second thing is Christians have realized that despite the riches and the blessings of God in Africa, Africa has been termed one of the poorest. And, when you look at the number of poor and indebted nations in the world, Africa has the greatest number. And so Christians have come to the point where they are praying and say, God, you must bring a change for us to enjoy the blessings that you gave us naturally. And I believe that if these two things continue to happen, Christians continue to pray and the youths continue to claim their rights. When you see some of the interviews that the African youths have had with President Macron, where they stood up and faced a president, they are very bold. And when you see some of the riots that have taken place in Senegal, in Mali, some of these countries, I was saying that if it continues, I think Africa has a bright future. I'm seeing Africa independent politically, economically, and it will usher in development if our leaders also decide to change.
So, Doctor, you talked about neo-colonialism and you pointed that as the primary problem that Africa is facing right now.
Yeah.
Is that so? Am I right?
In my book, I can't remember
is that the primary problem? Is that the foremost problem that Africa is facing right now? Neo-colonialism.
No, there are two main problems. Madam Echoo, there are two main problems. The first problem is, I've termed them isms. Isms.
All right.
Yes. Yeah, isms. The first set of isms are local isms that our leadership needs to work on them. And what are these isms? I'll just give you some examples. There are at least 10 that I've cited in my book. There is traditionalism, there is tribalism, nepotism, there's egoism, there is authoritarianism, there's alcoholism, there is mysticism. These are some of the local isms that our leadership has to come out of. Why am I saying so? Let me say something. Africa was colonized as much as India, as much as China, as much as some of the Caribbean nations. But today, look at India. India is out of the influence of the colonial masters and is developing. It's one of the developing, strong, fast developing nations in the world. Things like, 𝗡𝗲𝗄 and they have a lot of specialists in technology and so on. Look at China. China is a super world power, despite some of the colonial things that happened, Australia and so on. So I think we African leaders, we have to face facts with the fact that we should not throw all our blames on the colonial masters. We ourselves, we have allowed ourselves to continue to be remote controlled instead of seizing the power that we need to have. Let me tell you, Madam Echoo, the day that President Laurent Gbagbo of Cote d'Ivoire was caught by the international army, I wept because I saw this man as a leader ordained by God to free Africa from neocolonialism. But they came in and destroyed him. So the first is the leadership style of our leaders. And then secondly, I just put neocolonialism as a second strong point for which Africa needs to be liberated. Obviously, there are some countries, English-speaking countries that have been liberated. So I put the two on the same level. Neocolonialism and also African isms need to be worked on.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Shu right there, dipping out from his book, New Paradigms in African Leadership. You know what? We'll be right back. He just gave us all those isms. I don't know what you think about them. Put them in the chat. Let's know what you think, and we'll be right back.
For your corporate and personal needs.
Leaders World Institute, changing lives, one leader at a time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shu Daniel here, speaking with us on the Leaders World on his book, New Paradigms in African Leadership. And while you were talking about all those isms that are in Africa and what Africa needs to do, I was just thinking about mindset transformation. And I know you are big in paradigm shifts, teaching and training. Tell us about the power of mindset shifts as far as the new era for Africa and African youth and even the old. What can we do? Tell us about the power of mindset shifts as far as ushering us into the new era.
Absolutely, I like that question. I like that question. Because I think of myself as the intermediary between the old paradigm of a mindset and the new paradigm of a new mindset. I think I have gone between. We are the kind of people who are saying we need a new mindset in the leadership in Africa. Why? Why am I saying so? When independence, in quotes, when independence came in, the new leaders that came in, they had not learned leadership in school. They had not practiced leadership. The only kind of leadership they knew was the colonial masters' leadership. And so their paradigms were not changed. Let me give you an example. The school system today is still the archaic method of training. In school, you are teaching children about Britain, about America, about Europe, what do those children learn about those things, and how will it ever profit them?
Yeah.
Instead of telling the children how to be able to transform, leaves into medicines, because we have the leaves,
Yes.
transform into medicines, how to be able to transform trees to lumber, to timber, and how to be able to use every aspect of the tree. Our educational system has continued to be a white collar job seeking educational system, and it's going right up to universities. Now we need a new kind of education where we train people to create jobs, to create riches, to bring a change in their environment, beginning from their villages, and then their towns, and then their nations, and then their continent. We need that. So that's just an example. Let me give you another example about money. Up till today, can you imagine that our money is printed out of the country? How can that be possible, my dear sister? 60 years after independence, are we really independent? Can you imagine that our economy is still subjected to the European euro?
Ooh.
So are we really independent? So I really think that we began seeing these things, and we were not strong enough to be able to cry foul. But now the youths that are coming after us, they are seeing it and they are crying foul. So I think there's a good shift in the mentality of our youths. And I want to encourage our youths who already see what Africa was supposed to be, where Africa was supposed to be, and they're saying the time has come for it to happen. I really believe that by God's grace, if we begin to have the new youths, the youths coming into leadership with this new mentality, it will not take long for Africa to reach where it's supposed to be.
That is so hopeful. What you just said, and what can we do? We can only hope for the future. I'm reading from your book, New Paradigms in African Leadership. I'm actually reading from page 31 right now, and you say leadership is the ability of a visionary to build a team with the aim of transforming men, organizations, and society to the best that they can be in all aspects, and influence subsequent generations. Talk about, I'm going to talk about some other things on this page really soon, but I was hoping that you could tell us more about influencing not only this generation, but influencing the next generation. How can the Africa of today prepare for these shifts that would be transgenerational, and that would be positive? That would be the Africa that we've all been hoping for, the changes that we've been running to Europe, to Asia, and to other places where sometimes we are not even welcome. How can we make Africa that place for us? How can the mother in the village be part of this movement? How can the youth in the city be part of this movement? How can the civil servants that's working in their office be part of this movement?
Thank you very much, Suzanne. I want to say there's an English expression that says necessity is the mother of invention. I think our leaders have not created the circumstances of real need. Let me give you an example. If you know how much rice Cameroon imports from Asia per year, it's by far more than the productivity of the nation. If Cameroonian leaders made an injunction and say, in the next 2 years, we are not going to import rice, we are going to export rice, whether you like it or not, Cameroonians will produce rice because there's a necessity, there is an imposed condition, and they will work for it.
Yes.
If Cameroonian leaders came up with strategic plans for the towns and say, in the next 5 years, if you don't have a story building in the major streets of the town, your land will be seized. You will see a change. You will see a change. There are certain things that if the leadership of the nation came up with and gave time and imposed conditions for positive change, things will happen. Things will happen. The problem is that, let me give an example. I studied with the daughter of the president of Cameroon in Cameroon as a medical student. She was my classmate. And that was one of the first times that I went to the presidency of Cameroon, because when we all graduated, the president invited all the classmates of the daughter to the presidency. Now, but what happens with many other leaders? Oh, they send their children abroad, they squander the finances of the nation, and the children don't even come back. But if the leaders, okay, when somebody is sick, when a minister is sick, when an important person is sick, they are quickly rushing him to Europe. What happened if Europe and America had not developed their hospitals? If they say in the next 2 years, no person will be for medical reasons, will sent abroad, they will develop the medical facilities in Cameroon. If there was a decision that in the next 5 years, no logs of wood will be sent abroad, they will be able to transform the wood in Cameroon, and that will produce great jobs. You know, that's what our leaders are supposed to do. We need to create riches locally. And let me tell you that that's what has happened with South Africa. Where South Africa is today is because of the white man's, I'm sorry to put it that way, but it's because of the white man's rule in South Africa. And the white man in South Africa, what did they say? All natural raw products in South Africa will be transformed in South Africa, and they'll be exported as finished products. So all gold, all minerals, all wood, even you have there's a mineral that is mined from Tanzania. It's called Tanzanite, because it doesn't appear in the what do you call it, the chart, the periodic chart of minerals. There are so many minerals in Africa that don't appear in the periodic chart of minerals. So Tanzanite, it doesn't appear. So Tanzanite is supposed to be transformed in Tanzania, but since Tanzania doesn't have that, they export it to South Africa, and South Africa transforms Tanzanite to finished products, and everything is exported. If every African nation were to do that, my dear sister, I want to tell you, it will create jobs, it will industrialize the nations, it will open the doors for employment. Our children will not more go abroad, because they will be employed locally and will produce finished products and will export them. Our nations will develop. I think that is what I'm thinking that our young people are going to do. And when they begin to do it, especially if we give them power and their possibility, and if neocolonialism continue to impose itself, I think we have a better and a brighter future. I have that great expectation.
Wow, 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 wow. Listen, you all are quiet over there. Why are you so quiet? Come on, put in the chat, new paradigms in African leadership. Please do that for me. Hashtag new paradigms in Africa. Let's know you're there. Let's Dr. Should know he's being listened to. All right.
That's right.
Let me know
That's right.
he's doing so good over here. You all should do better. Come on, let's do that. New paradigms in African leadership. Let's do that. Hashtag, put it in the chat. Let's know you're there. All right. And if you have questions, this is your chance to also put a question while Dr. Shu is here with us. And while you're talking, I have like 20, 25 30 questions popping in my mind that I want to ask you, because
Yes.
we only have so much time to talk about this, to dig into this. But I wanted you to talk about the acronym VITAL, 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 and then S, which stands for Vision, Influence, Transformation, Army, Team, Legacy, and then Servant Heart or Spirituality. Vision, Influence, Transformation, Army, Team, Legacy, Servant Heart. I'm reading from page 31 still. Just,
Okay.
while you were talking, I was thinking, if we can just dig into these concepts, into these ideas, into these philosophies, into these way of thinking,
Yeah.
something will definitely shift.
Yeah, thank you, my dear sister. I'm really praying and I'm really believing. And I continue to teach leadership across Africa. I think we've made a small progress, and we hope that those who are taking off from us, presently I'm building mentors. I'm a mentor, sorry. And I have mentees. I'm trying to build leadership into them, and we hope that they will be able to take over and continue. That's why I have a school in Cameroon called 𝗡𝗲𝗄 Institute. LEAD is an acronym which talks about leadership, which talks about economy, about auditing, accountability and development. And I really believe that these aspects and these ideas we are bringing in to leadership in Africa, and especially our purpose is to train leaders professionally efficient and spiritually matured, so that the professionalism will bring performance and the spirituality will bring character and being models. And the two put together, like Daniel of the Bible, I think we'll have excellent leaders. But the word vital is my personal definition of a leader. A leader must have a vision. He must be able to set goals and develop strategies. Because if you have a vision and it's only just a statement, it is just a dream. But every vision must be realized. Mandela realized his vision. And we are praying that every leader in every nation, whether it's president, whether it's ministers, governors, they should have visions for their jurisdiction and work towards the realization of the vision. Normally, a leader needs to be re-elected because they see him accomplishing a vision. One of the presidents in Senegal, President Watt, when he came in, his vision for the first 5 years was, I will transform Senegal into a building site. A building site. And by the end of 5 years, he had projects all over the nation. Projects of roads here, projects of infrastructure here, projects of development here. And he came and told you guys, I have succeeded my vision. See, Senegal has become a building site. If you give me another 5 years now, I will complete all the projects that I had. And the nation saw what he was doing, and they gave him a second mandate. I think that's the vision aspect. Influence. John Maxwell, one of my mentors, and I know he's your mentor too, he says, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. We need to influence positively, creating a positive impact that is durable wherever we are. Whether the influence is in the lives of people or whether the influence is in structures or in the society. Now, the I talk about transmission. Now, transmission talks about, at the end of your mandate, at the end of your time of leadership, when you look back, what have you changed? What positive changes have you made? You must be able to say that, I took the nation, I took the organization, I took the company at this level. I am leaving it at level B. And between level A and level B, these are the things that come in. That's what we are supposed to do to evaluate every leader. Yes. Because the leader has brought transformation in the lives of people and transformation in the society. And A talks about an army, a team. every good leader succeeds because he has built a winning team. But you know, in politics, you destroy all your opponents. You destroy all your opponents, and your opponents are the people who have bright ideas, who can challenge you, and then you leave all the non-entities around you in order to remain the king. In leadership, we say every good leader must have between 5 and 15% of people who see and think differently from him. And that leader should appreciate those 5 to 15%, should listen to them, should be able to use their ideas to improve his leadership. But unfortunately, in political leadership in Africa, you crush the 15%. You deal with them. You eliminate them so that you don't have opponents. And then you have all the Uncle Toms around you who just say, yes, sir, and they just bow to you because they want you to stay in power. So I think those are issues that need to happen. You build a team of people who will help you to succeed, but who will be able to face you and criticize you and say, sir, this is wrong, this is right, if you do it this way. And mostly the team should be technocrats, not politicians. Politicians know how to play politics. They don't know how to bring administration. They don't know how to bring development. They know how to bring changes. They are technocrats that bring those changes. So our team must be made of technocrats. That's the army. And then what was the last letter? Vitals. The last letter is S.
Yes.
L. L is a legacy. L is a legacy. Every leader must leave behind him a legacy. And lastly, servanthood or a servant heart. You must be ready to serve the people. That's what leadership is all about. Leadership is not about lording over people. Leadership is about serving people. And when we realize that Jesus served and he's created an impact in the whole world,
Yes.
our leaders must learn to serve.
Doctor, we have a question from Patricia.
Yes.
Hey, Patricia, shout out to you. Patricia is joining us from Zimbabwe, and she says greetings from Zimbabwe, and she has a lot of comments in the chat, and she has a question. Her question is, education can be the vehicle to transformation. Give us your perspective on educational leadership.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you for coming in. And I think, excellent comment. Look, China is where they are because of education. China decided to train mathematicians. And when we're learning maths in school, they said mathematics is always 100 years before its application. And Chinese today, look, you want any machine, just tell them what kind of machine you want, and they will go into their factories and they will produce it. It's because of education. India is where they are today because of education. Brazil is where they are today because of education, but not just the education, the colonial master's education. Education that is able to bring transformation of the natural products and know how to work agriculture, know how to transform the raw material into finished products, know how to produce water from our rivers and from the wells. That is education. It's, what we call localized or nationalized education. That education is not about what is happening over there, but how we can bring a change in our environment. And I think that if African leaders would understand this and change their educational systems, all the changes that are brought in the educational system are brought from Europe and America. But our think tank is not there to say, let us transform our educational systems to fit the local situation. Education is key to transformation.
Wow. Hey, listen, first of all, congratulations and shout out to us, meaning we are the team, the winning team. Why do I say that? Because now we have stars, okay? Facebook has unlocked that possibility for us. On my platform on my face, so you can send stars to support this show and to keep us on the air. Okay, so you can send us stars, and you can do Zelle, you can do Cash App. We have the information on the screen to support this program. But I was so excited when I saw they sent me the email about the possibility for us to get stars. I was like, I called my son. You see, I'm still learning this whole technology thing. I called my son. I said, "Hey, come here. They say we can get stars. What does it mean?" So my son told me about the stars, and we tried to test it, and he was the first to send me stars. Shout out to you. Shout out to you. Winning team. All right, he sent me stars so we could see how the stars work. Dr. Shu is here. You see, we have just a couple of minutes, and I have a ton of questions I still want to ask.
I wish we had more, but it's fine. It's good to go one bit at a time.
The one question I'm going to ask you right now is, what are some of the strengths of the continent? What are some of the strengths of the continent, African continent, that we could harness? What are the strengths, and how can we harness these strengths to become a powerful emerging continent in this dispensation, in this century?
Wow. I think Africa has very, very many strengths. This may be shocking to many people, but Africa is the second richest continent in the world. Second richest place, only to the Middle East. The Middle East, their riches are mainly oil. And you know, God had definitely given the Middle East to Israel, but Israel played carelessly, and they only occupied 10% of what they were supposed to occupy. And the Arabs came in. But look at what the Arabs are doing with the riches in the Middle East. The Middle East has become a small paradise. Even the Israelites in the little desertic kind of land they have, their ingenuity has transformed Israel to be a small paradise. But come to Africa, my dear sister. Africa has all the minerals of the world, and more than the minerals that are found on the periodic table. Africa has the greatest deposits of diamond, has about 40% of the deposits of gold in the whole world. They have some of the highest deposits of uranium, of mercury, of cobalt. And when you know what cobalt is the most researched for mineral, because it goes into the development of planes and cell phones and, you know, all the modern technology. All these are found in Africa. Apart from minerals, Africa has one of the thickest forests in the world. And when you talk about forest, you are talking about three things. You are talking about wood, that's timber. You are talking about fauna, which talks about animals. And when you talk about wood, you're not talking about timber, you're also talking about medicines. And you are also talking about vegetation, about fertility, fertile land for agriculture. Africa has this, and they can cultivate, they can grow anything in Africa. Africa has water resources. You know, many African nations have very long and rich rivers. And when you talk about rivers, you are talking about fish, you are talking about electricity, you are talking about water, irrigation. Let me tell you, the Nile is the second longest river in the world. And it irrigates almost from North Africa down to East Africa. And the countries that are around here, you talk of the Nile Valley. The Nile Valley is one of the most fertile areas in Africa. Then Africa has the smartest brains in the world. Of course, if you follow up with the WhatsApp and all the, you know of the most recent genius in Africa who has developed screens television screens that don't need electricity, cars that don't need batteries to run, and even helicopters. But what is happening? They have refused to give him patent license. A few years back, there was a young man who developed wonderful treatment against malaria. And if this treatment was used around the world, it would have eliminated malaria in the world. He was killed. You know, the Tanzanian president who came up against the political demonstration for COVID to show that COVID was curable. And every medical personnel agrees on it today. What happened? They eliminated him. So, you know, Africa has some of the smartest brains. And if we were to exploit the brains of the Africans, I tell you, we will not be where we are today. If we were to use just our natural resources, we will become a super developed continent, a premier world, and we will export finished products in the rest of the world. So I really have hopes that the future Africa is bright if we don't continue to have brain drain, but we use the brains in Africa. Let our political leaders understand this. Let us create room to use our brains in Africa, and we are going to be a premier world.
We are at the end of this broadcast, and yes, the feeling is mutual. The feeling is mutual. I don't know where to start. I don't know where to end, but somehow we need to be respectful of our audiences and your time and all of that. Whew.
Oh boy.
I would say thank you first. Many people will watch this on all the different platforms where we are going to throw them.
Mm.
Some will be Africans. Some will not be Africans.
That's right.
What is your last word as far as this show, this broadcast to our audiences?
Yes. My last word, Suzanne, is the diaspora, African diaspora, help us. Let me read something from the back of the book. According to Dr. Shu, it will need the joint efforts of all continental compatriots, political, traditional, social, economic, and spiritual leaders, and the synergic contribution of the intelligentsia, both at home and in the diaspora, while the local leaders fight against the continental isms, including traditionalism, tribalism, egoicism, capitalism, mysticism, materialism, neocolonialism, etc. Those of the diaspora will facilitate emergence through modern technological methods in education, agriculture, health, and other developmental spheres. We need a joint effort of both the diaspora and also those of us who are back home. But let me say this. Some studies were made several years ago. I don't know how many years ago. I don't remember all the details, but the study said that 45% of the earnings of Asians in the diaspora is sent back to Asia. 50% of the earnings of those in the diaspora from Latin America is sent back to Latin America. But less than 5% of the earnings of Africans is sent back to Africa. I mean, that rings a bell. Africans in the diaspora help us back home to develop our continent. That's my last word.
And ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Let's know your comments, because we are building a transformation. Be part of that transformation for a new Africa.
For your corporate and personal needs.
Leaders World Institute, changing lives, one leader at a time.